I was elbow deep in the Lincoln Douglas debates. Not the transcripts, but the actual, fragile, centuries-old letters. When my personal phone vibrated in the secure desk drawer. Here, in the pristine, temperature-controlled silence of the National Archives. Surrounded by documents that shaped the very foundation of the Republic. My life felt safe, profoundly meaningful, and utterly divorced from the world of petty, desperate ambition. I am Dr. Elara Vance, 35, Senior Archivist for Special Collections. I handle national treasures. The U.S. government trusts me with history itself. The job requires meticulous, almost obsessive attention to detail, a trait my family has always mistaken for a crippling lack of personality. The notification wasn't a text. It was an alert from my highly secure credit monitoring service, the one I maintain with the same clinical rigor I apply to preservation filings. A new, unfamiliar inquiry had been logged. The Veritas Bank. It was a small, high-net worth private banking firm, the kind of place people go when they need discretion, not collateral. I'd never heard of it, much less applied for anything there. Most people would panic, assume a simple error, or call the bank. I didn't. Instead, I felt that familiar, cold clarity descend, the kind that allows me to focus all computational power on a single anomaly. This wasn't a clerical error. This was the first seismic tremor before a disaster, and I knew exactly who the epicenter was. The scene that flashed into my mind was Thanksgiving dinner, 6 weeks prior, at my parents' colossal, pretentious Georgetown home. Cassandra, my 32-year-old sister, the golden child and reigning queen of visibility, had arrived precisely 20 minutes late, trailing a dramatic, fox, fur coat, and talking loudly into a Bluetooth earpiece about her brand's Q4 monetization strategy. She didn't have a job. She had a lifestyle brand, meaning she was a professional, high-end influencer and consultant, constantly broadcasting a life of unattainable and financially unsustainable luxury. The Cayman Island retreat doubled our engagement numbers. Daddy, she'd announced, accepting a glass of expensive champagne from our father, Harrison, a retired diplomat who valued social status and flash above all else. I'm securing that Georgetown waterfront pied tear next month. It's crucial for client-facing ambience. My brand needs that address. My mother, Victoria, who was busy orchestrating a table setting that looked like a museum exhibit, beamed with pride. Then Cassandra's eyes, inevitably, found mine. Still dusting off dead president's handwriting. Elara. Her voice was syrupy, laced with condescension, loud enough for the staff to hear. You should really get a life that's visible. Or at least one that requires decent shoes, that haven't seen a fluorescent light in 10 years. I smiled. A tight, neutral expression I'd perfected since childhood, and simply changed the subject. I watched her leave that night, climbing into her leased, bright white Tesla Model X, a symbol of debt and manufactured success, speeding away from the house our parents paid the taxes on. Her spending, lately, had been astronomical, far outstripping the sporadic, questionable income generated by her brand. Now, staring at the Veritas Bank inquiry, the pieces snapped together with the clean, brutal logic of a forensic puzzle. I tucked my phone securely into the pocket of my tailored, but inexpensive, wool trousers and walked with the measured pace of someone who spends her days handling priceless artifacts toward a rarely used, soundproof media transcription room. Once the heavy, steel door clicked shut, isolating me in the thick silence, I called Cassandra's cell. Elara. Wow, big day, she answered, her voice sounding clipped and annoyed. I'm literally walking into a high-powered, pitch, meeting brunch. Make it quick. Cassandra, quick question. I said, my voice soft, almost dangerously gentle. The voice of the invisible sister. I just got a weird credit notification. Did you, by any chance, accidentally use my details for something? Maybe a bank form got mixed up with one of your business filings. Her laugh was instantaneous, a bright, defensive volley that sounded rehearsed. You are absolutely unbelievable, Elara. Seriously. Is the musty air of those archives making you completely paranoid? I have a highly visible brand to maintain. Why would I mess around with your paperwork? My heart rate never deviated from its perfect, archival 65 beats per minute. So? That's a definite no.
Of course not!
I have to go, I'm being summoned by investors. Don't call me at work, it looks unprofessional. The line cut off. I lowered the phone, the gentle sister disappearing like smoke. In her place was Dr. Vance, the archivist. The woman who tracks the most minute paper trail to reconstruct historical truths. I knew with absolute certainty that she had lied. The average sister would feel betrayal, rage, or shock. I felt only cold, professional certainty. She had targeted the wrong person. A person whose entire career is built on uncovering secrets, hidden in plain sight. Back at my desk, I logged into my NARA secure terminal. My job allows me access to specialized, secure federal systems used for tracking classified document chains of custody, file retrieval, and forensic document analysis. With a few subtle adaptations and a little creative coding, a quiet hobby they also knew nothing about. I could repurpose these tools to track a digital paper trail, just as easily as a paper one. I pulled up an empty internal investigative log and paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't just a credit inquiry. This was the moment I chose to open a case, not just against my sister, but against the decades of dismissal, preference, and outright contempt that created her. I typed Vance, Cassandra aggravated identity fraud. Then, quietly, professionally, I began documenting the facts: the credit alert, the bank, the call to Cassandra and her blatant lie, the Thanksgiving dinner, the unsustainable lifestyle. As the late afternoon light faded, leaving the archives quiet and still, my colleagues packed up their sensible bags and left. I remained, methodical and focused. This wasn't about blood anymore. This was case file narrative 412. My family, Harrison and Victoria, mostly, mistook my quiet discipline for a lack of drive. They never understood that the ability to track, wait, and organize is the most lethal form of power. Cassandra was about to receive a history lesson. I saved the file, shut down the system, and walked to the staff parking garage. I unlocked my perfectly maintained, dark green 10-year-old Volvo 240DL. As I drove home to my meticulously organized row house in Capitol Hill, I felt a deep, steady sense of equilibrium. The woman they called the quiet one had just initiated the largest operation of her life. And Cassandra had no idea she was about to be cataloged, documented, and archived. The next morning, armed with my security clearance credentials, I pulled my full credit report onto my NARA screen. The subtle hum of the archival office faded as I stared at the truth. It was worse than an inquiry. A $150,000 personal loan from the Veritas Bank, approved just 2 days prior, sat there like a malignant tumor on my otherwise flawless credit history. I allowed myself one brief, cold moment of shock before the archivist took complete control. The $150,000. I immediately pulled the digital loan application. My name, my social security number, my impeccable score, all there, but the signature. I zoomed in using the high-resolution archival software. It was a cartoonish attempt, a looping, confident scrawl that bore little resemblance to my precise, trained handwriting. Cassandra hadn't even bothered to make it look real. Her arrogance was practically a signature in itself. The stated income was inflated by over 100,000 beyond my actual federal salary. I screenshotted every page, dating, time-stamping, and saving it to my secure, encrypted local drive. I leaned back, hands clasped, the cool air conditioning of the archives a perfect contrast to the heat rising in my chest. The gravity of the fraud settled in. This wasn't just money. This was identity theft and bank fraud. A federal offense that could, and would, jeopardize my high-level security clearance. The very foundation of my career, and my carefully constructed life away from their influence. Cassandra hadn't just stolen a number. She had tried to demolish my entire professional existence. My initial, reflexive thought was to call the Veritas Bank and shut it down. But I stopped my hand inches from the phone. No, that's the emotional reaction. That's what she expects. If I move too fast, she'll be alerted, she'll delete her digital footprint, and she'll spin a tale to our parents about my hysterical overreaction. To her, borrowing a resource, I would become the unreasonable, jealous sister again. This was a forensic operation now. I opened my secure browser and began the meticulous assembly of evidence. treating Cassandra exactly like any other subject in a sensitive, classified investigation. First, every piece of evidence was screenshotted, dated, and time-stamped. Next, I cross-referenced the loan disbursement date with her recent social media activity. Her Instagram feed was a relentless highlight reel of conspicuous consumption. One post, from 3 days ago, caught my eye: a selfie in front of a stunning, enormous bay window overlooking the Potomac River. The caption, "Pied, Terra ambience secured. Q4 just got a lot more aspirational. Penn blessed, Pem waterfront." The timestamp was exactly 1 day after the 150,000 loan funds would have cleared. I accessed public property and corporate records next. The exclusive Georgetown waterfront Pied Terra, a temporary luxury rental she'd hyped, required a $145,000 lump sum deposit to secure the lease. The picture was complete. I had the motive, an unsustainable public life, and a desperate need for a $145,000 infusion. I had the means, my stolen identity and credit score. I had the digital trail, the forged loan connected directly to the Pied Terra deposit. The trap was set. All that was missing was the confession. I closed the files and powered down my computer, leaving my office with the same quiet, efficient grace I always did. I drove my vintage Volvo 240DL home, its engine humming reliably, feeling a deep, steady calm. Cassandra had bet on my silence, my predictability. I was playing a long, quiet game, the most dangerous game of all. The archivist was hunting, and the golden child was oblivious prey. 3 months of absolute, excruciating silence followed the fraud discovery, a quiet period. I used to tighten the digital net until it was inescapable. The loan payments for the 150,000 kept showing up on my credit alert service, barely hitting the minimum due date. Cassandra was cautious enough to avoid a default trigger, but far too arrogant to think she'd ever face real, serious consequences. I watched, I waited, and I meticulously documented every single piece of data. My days continued with the serene professionalism of the archives. I was deep in a centuries-old treaty revision, comparing ink density and paper fiber, when my desk phone rang. My mother, Victoria. "Alara, darling," her voice, smooth as silk and dripping with forced social significance, carried the familiar sound of an orchestrated announcement. "We're hosting an exclusive small dinner at the Georgetown house this Friday. Cassandra has some absolutely sensational news about her brand's new funding round, and her securing the lease on the waterfront apartment." I noted the tone. Demanding, not inviting. It was a summons to witness her latest triumph. "What kind of news?" I asked, my voice as neutral as the gray archival box I was cataloging. "Oh, she insists on telling everyone herself. You know how she loves a grand reveal," Victoria said, a hint of forced pride in her voice. "You will be there, of course. It's important for the family image. We need to present a united front for her new investors." "Of course," I replied, the lie passing easily through my lips. Hanging up, I stared at the historical documents awaiting my review. 3 months of patience, broken by this inevitable need for an audience. Cassandra couldn't resist the temptation to flaunt her stolen success, to rub it in my face one last time. The timing was perfect, the peak of her hubris, the exact moment I needed. Friday evening, I parked my reliable, dark green, perfectly maintained Volvo 240DL several blocks away from my parents' sprawling Georgetown estate, keeping its sensible presence out of sight of their neighbors, ostentatious European sports cars. Through the bay window, I could see Cassandra's leased Tesla Model X, gleaming like a beacon of debt and vanity under the porch lights. I checked my phone before stepping out. The audio recording app was updated, tested, and running perfectly. The District of Columbia is a one-party consent jurisdiction. My legal foundation was solid. I slipped the small device into the hidden pocket of my dress. The dress was simple, dark, and utterly forgettable. Exactly the way I wanted to be tonight, and walked toward the entrance. "Alara," my mother cooed, opening the door before I could knock, as if she'd been timing my arrival. She smelled of expensive, cloying perfume and anticipatory triumph. "Everyone's waiting." The dining room was arranged with the precision of a high-level diplomatic dinner, complete with silver candelabras, heirloom crystal glasses, and antique linen napkins folded into swans. Harrison, my father, stood by the mantelpiece, nursing a scotch, while Cassandra held court near the windows, a glass of dark red wine already staining her lips. Look who finally emerged from the basement, Cassandra announced, her smile tight with amusement. Did you have to leave the Constitution unguarded, Alara? Or are you just late because your Volvo is old? I returned her jab with my practiced, noncommittal smile. Traffic on the hill was unforgiving. Happy to be here. Dinner proceeded exactly according to the script I'd filed away in my mental archive. Harrison discussed the state of the global economy and his golf scores. Victoria inquired about Cassandra's recent client, facing trips and her rumored brand expansion, and I gave brief, monotone answers about the structural challenges of preserving 19th century documents and whether I'd finally consider moving out of my charming, but so tiny, row house. But Cassandra was different tonight. She was practically vibrating with contained, volatile energy, her eyes constantly flicking toward me. Measuring my silence, she refilled her wine glass twice before the dessert, a complicated, multi-layered chocolate confection she always demanded, was served. As Victoria began distributing the slices, I casually placed my phone on the table next to my water glass, screen down, looking utterly unassuming. The tiny red recording light was completely invisible against the dark cherry wood. Cassandra lifted her crystal wine glass, tapping it lightly with her fork. The gentle ring silenced the room immediately. I actually have something rather important to share, she announced, her cheeks flushed, her eyes locking directly onto mine with a predatory grin. Funny story, actually. About that Georgetown waterfront pied poo. Tur deposit and my supposed new funding. It wasn't funding. I used your credit to get a $150,000 personal loan. The silence that followed was suffocating. Harrison froze, his fork hovering halfway to his mouth. Victoria's smile remained fixed, a brittle, terrifying mask of uncertainty. They both watched me, waiting for the familiar Alara, the one who would retreat, accommodate, and apologize for existing. Cassandra leaned forward, her eyes bright, emboldened by the lack of immediate explosion. My score was a bit tied up with various investments, but yours. Flawless, boring, archival perfection. Honestly, Alara, you should thank me. I'm actually activating your credit profile, giving it some life. It's for the best. The moment stretched into an eternity. I looked at Cassandra, my face utterly devoid of emotion, a blank slate, the archivist at work. Why would you do that, Cassandra? I asked, my voice low but perfectly clear, cutting through the silence. That is federal bank fraud and aggravated identity theft. Cassandra laughed, a loud, shrill, brittle sound. Oh, please, don't be so dramatic, Alara. It's just family. It's paperwork. Who's going to notice? You think the FBI cares about your little perfect credit score? They have actual crime to worry about. Fraudulently obtaining a loan using a stolen identity is a federal felony. I continued, my voice retaining that calm, terrifying flatness. The maximum penalty is 30 years in prison and $1 million fine. Did you use the entirety of that money for the $145,000 deposit on the Georgetown lease? A tiny flicker of uncertainty crossed her eyes, the first real crack in her facade. How do you know about that? Just curious, I said, taking a small, slow sip of water. Because transferring fraudulently obtained funds across state lines to secure a luxury lease would also constitute wire fraud. Those sentences typically run consecutively. My father, Harrison, finally slammed his fork onto his plate. Now, Alara. That's enough. I'm sure Cassandra meant no harm. She's just a very ambitious girl. Always has been. She'll pay it back, of course. Richard. Please, Victoria whispered, trying desperately to smooth the edges of the disaster. Cassandra's face hardened, her initial amusement replaced by a defensive snarl. Don't worry, Daddy. Alara won't do anything. She never does. She wouldn't want to be the sister who had to explain to her government friends why her family is under investigation. All those awkward questions about family loyalty, Alara. You'd lose that precious security clearance. Every single word was logged. Every timestamp noted. The confession was clean, arrogant, and undeniably recorded. I checked my watch, a quiet, simple thing. I should go. I have an early meeting tomorrow accessing some sensitive materials. You're leaving? We haven't had coffee. Victoria asked, her voice bordering on hysterical. Sorry, I said, standing up and picking up my phone, sliding it discreetly into my pocket, the evidence secured. Work. Cassandra raised her wine glass in a mock salute, the smile returning, believing she'd won. The wheels of government never stop turning, right, Elara? Have fun with your dead papers. I nodded politely to my parents, ignored Cassandra's barb, and walked out the front door into the cool, clean night air. I didn't drive toward my Capitol Hill row house. I drove straight to a secure, after-hours federal drop box facility. The building was empty. Just the night security guard who knew me well enough not to question my presence. I logged into a restricted terminal and pulled up the file I'd been building for 3 months. I filled out the official conflict of interest notice with methodical precision, the digital paper trail perfect. I attached the audio file from tonight's dinner. I added the forged loan documents, the credit report I'd been tracking, and the lease agreement records I obtained through public filings. I reviewed everything once more, every comma, every attachment, verifying each statement with the rigor of an archivist authenticating a historical document. Then I transferred the entire evidence chain to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office. I hit submit and watched the case vanish from my queue, escalating to a level I could no longer touch. The counterattack had begun, quiet, systematic, and completely irreversible. On Monday morning, I arrived at the archives earlier than usual. The fact that the physical evidence binder, containing the fraud documents and, most damningly, the audio clip, was no longer in my possession felt like a strange lightness. I signed in at security, my high-level clearance badge glinting under the fluorescent lights as I moved through the building with the practiced invisibility of a government employee who deals in secrets. My desk phone rang at precisely 8:32 am. It was the assistant for Deputy Director Hayes, the official in charge of our agency's inter-departmental security and ethics protocols. Her voice was crisp and professional. Dr. Vance, Deputy Director Hayes would like to see you immediately. She has a highly sensitive personnel file to discuss. The walk to Hayes's office felt infinitely longer than the actual 50 feet. 3 doors down, 2 high security checkpoints, 1 final breath before I knocked. Enter, Elara, Hayes called from within. Deputy Director Hayes sat behind her large, imposing mahogany desk, her back straight as a ruler. At 58, she commanded the room without ever raising her voice above a conversational tone. She was the human equivalent of a secure vault. Her silver, streaked hair was pulled into a severe bun, and reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. The physical evidence binder, the one I'd sent to the FBI, lay open before her. Vance, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. Set. I did, keeping my hands folded in my lap, resisting every urge to fidget. My pulse remained steady, the steady, rhythmic beat of someone who had prepared for this moment for years. Hayes removed her glasses, setting them carefully beside the binder. I've reviewed your submission. Every single page, every single timestamp, the forensic analysis of the forged signature, all of it. Her eyes, sharp as any curator's, assessed me. Thorough work, clean chain of custody, irrefutable evidence. Textbook execution, Dr. Vance. I nodded once, my face a professional mask, accepting the compliment like a dry memo. Good work, Vance. This is clean. You are recused from this investigation effective immediately. The word hung in the air between us. Not a question. Not a suggestion. A fact. Delivered with the finality that comes from 27 years in the federal system. Hayes closed the binder with a soft, final thump. The FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C. have taken possession of the file. Standard protocol for family-involved cases. It protects the integrity of the investigation, and frankly, it protects you. She leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting, almost imperceptibly, the closest thing to humanity I'd ever seen from her. And Elara, you handled this by the book. I'm truly sorry it's your family. Your personal life does not diminish your professional standing here. In fact, It reinforces your integrity. For a moment, I wondered if Hayes had stood where I stood now, if she too had once chosen duty over blood. Thank you, ma'am, I said, my voice unwavering. Nothing more needed to be said. The federal machine I'd served for years would now serve me. The case was out of my hands. As it should be, the recusal protecting everything I had worked for. I returned to my cubicle and opened my email. 37 new messages overnight, each demanding classified compliance reviews, verification of file security, and regulatory filings. I began methodically working through them, my fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Lunchtime came and went. I ate a pre-packed salad at my desk, reviewing a suspicious activity report flagged by a small regional bank outside Chicago. An actual case, a real crime, a comforting distraction. I analyzed transaction patterns from a credit union in West Virginia. I answered calls from field examiners in Florida. I drove home in my old Volvo 240DL, the reliable engine humming as I merged onto the Capitol Hill streets. I was, once again, invisible. Just the quiet archivist with the safe government job. My phone buzzed at 7:43 p.m. My parents, Harrison and Victoria. I debated letting it go to voicemail, but I needed to hear the next stage of their denial. I answered. Alara? Honey? My mother's voice, brittle with forced cheer and desperation. You seemed very upset at dinner on Friday night. Your father and I wanted to check on you. I remained silent, waiting. You know how Cassandra is, she continued, filling the void. She's just ambitious. Always has been. She didn't mean anything by that dramatic little announcement. You misunderstood her intent. My father's voice cut in, clearly on speakerphone. The diplomat attempting damage control. Your sister is doing important things, Alara. Those kinds of high-profile ventures sometimes require flexibility with paperwork. She will pay it back, we'll see to it. Flexibility. The word they used when they meant bending rules, breaking laws, and destroying others to maintain their image. I have to go, I said, my voice flat. I have a meeting accessing a time-sensitive file. I hung up before they could respond. There was no meeting. Just the clean silence of my apartment and the knowledge that justice, like an archival process, moves at its own precise, inevitable pace. A week passed. The federal machine, the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, ground forward, invisible to the outside world, but inexorable nonetheless. I continued my daily routine. The separation between Investigator Vance and Alara, the sister, remaining absolute. Until Thursday morning, when my personal phone buzzed with an incoming text. Cassandra, the FBI just called me. They asked me about a loan application. What did you do? Call me now. I stared at the screen, feeling nothing. No satisfaction. No vindication. Just the calm certainty that systems were working as designed. I took a screenshot of the text and immediately forwarded it to the U.S. Attorney's Office, as instructed in my recusal protocol. Any contact was evidence of obstruction. 3 minutes later, another text arrived, angrier, more frantic. You'll ruin this family. Mom and Dad are devastated. You are a vindictive, pathetic little archivist. I screenshotted that one too. Sent it to the same email address, then calmly blocked her number. Evidence collection complete. Cassandra's panic was merely another data point in the investigation. The next morning, I sat in conference room B with 4 colleagues. We were discussing banking integrity measures for community banks and rural markets, when my phone vibrated silently in my pocket. A news alert. I didn't need to check it. I knew that across town, federal agents were approaching Cassandra in the parking garage of her Georgetown waterfront Pied. They'd be wearing dark suits, badges clipped to their belts. They'd identify themselves professionally. They'd inform her of the charges. They'd read her rights. I wasn't there, and I didn't need to be. The evidence chain I built, the credit reports, the forged applications, the loan disbursements traced directly to her luxury lease deposit, and, most damning of all, her own voice on that dinner recording, had already done the work. Alara. My colleague Tim looked at me expectantly. Your thoughts on the proposed compliance thresholds for regional banks? I cleared my throat. Returning instantly to the present. The current structure creates an unnecessary burden on institutions under 50 million in assets. I recommend a tiered approach based on risk assessment rather than blanket requirements. The meeting continued. The world turned. Justice advanced. And across town, my sister learned what I've always known. True power isn't found in leased Teslas or designer clothes. It's found in discipline, in systems, in doing your job flawlessly. Some might call it revenge. I simply call it compliance. On Friday morning, while I was back in the archives, meticulously referencing document provenance, federal agents were sifting through Cassandra's Georgetown waterfront pied pew tour with methodical precision. Financial records were spread across the chic, glass dining table, designer shopping bags stacked in the corners, all assets now frozen. An FBI investigator tapped through her laptop, while an agent from the U.S. Attorney's office cataloged the contents of a hidden safe behind a massive, abstract painting. Deputy Director Hayes, my superior, stood in the center of the temporary, fraudulent luxury, supervising the operation. "What's the damage?" she asked, her voice low and tight. The lead FBI agent looked up from a stack of loan documents, his expression grim. "It wasn't just Ilara, Deputy Director. We've found evidence of 9 distinct stolen identities, all used for various high-end loans and credit lines." 9. Hayes's eyebrows rose, a professional acknowledgement of the scale of the betrayal. Colleagues, former friends, and... The agent hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Her parents, Harrison and Victoria Vance. Hayes absorbed this information with a slight nod. Total amount: 560,000 in fraudulent debt, spread across multiple financial institutions. She was covering losses from failed brand investments and maintaining this entirely false facade. Hayes walked to the floor, to ceiling window, looking out over the exclusive neighborhood Cassandra had bought her way into. "Smart," she said, not with admiration, but with professional assessment. She kept each loan just under the 60,000 threshold that would trigger immediate, advanced underwriting and mandatory personal interviews. She knew the rules. The agent agreed. Stayed below the tripwire at every institution, made minimal payments, just enough to avoid triggering default alerts. She was playing a volume game, betting on the victim's silence. Outside, agents loaded Cassandra's leased Tesla Model X onto a flatbed truck. The bright white luxury vehicle gleamed under the autumn sun, soon to be seized like everything else. The expensive jewelry found in her bedroom safe. The investment accounts traced back to fraudulent funds. Every single asset connected to criminal proceeds. Hayes observed. She built her entire visible life on stolen identities, including those of the people who worshipped her. An agent approached with a tablet. "Deputy Director, we've found messages to a former business partner about moving the remaining funds offshore. Attempted deletion, but completely recoverable." Hayes nodded sharply. "Add obstruction of justice to the charges." The doorbell rang at my quiet Capitol Hill row house that evening. I checked the peephole to see my parents, Harrison and Victoria, standing in the hallway, their faces drawn and ruined by distress. I took a deep, steadying breath before opening the door. Harrison stepped forward first, his face flushed, the composure of the former diplomat shattered. "They arrested your sister. They say she used our names too. Ilara, you work for the government. You have to stop this. Tell them it's a mistake, a clerical error, a misunderstanding." Victoria clutched her husband's arm, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, the perfection of her face dissolving into panic. "Please, Ilara. They're saying terrible things. Fraud. Identity theft. They took her away in handcuffs. The shame on the family name." I stood in the doorframe, neither inviting them in nor stepping back, creating an impassable barrier. "I can't," I stated simply. "And it wasn't a mistake. I know exactly what she did." Harrison's expression hardened into the old, familiar anger of entitlement. "What do you mean you can't? After all we've done for you, the tuition, the support. You do this to your own sister. To your family. You're destroying her life." The words hung in the air, the familiar weight of obligation and guilt. But they felt like dust now. I felt nothing. She did this to all of us. I just did my job. I reported a federal crime. I closed the door quietly, the soft click of the latch more final, more absolute than any slammed door could ever be. 6 weeks later, I sat in a federal courtroom, 3 rows behind the prosecution table. The U.S. attorney stood before the jury, her voice clear and confident, as she presented the government's case against Cassandra Vance. 18 counts of federal bank fraud, wire fraud, and aggravated identity theft. Cassandra sat at the defense table in a navy pantsuit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun, missing the glossy shine and designer accessories I remembered. Without her mask of luxury, she looked smaller, diminished, pathetic. The judge addressed the court. The court denied bail, due to evidence of attempted obstruction of justice. The defendant attempted to delete financial records and contacted relatives about moving funds offshore after becoming aware of the investigation. I watched Cassandra's shoulders tense. She hadn't looked at me once since the trial began, her focus fixed on the disaster unfolding before her. The prosecutor approached an evidence cart. The government would like to present Exhibit 14, an audio recording made by the defendant's sister, Dr. Elara Vance, during a family dinner on July 12. A technician prepared the audio equipment. The courtroom fell utterly silent as Cassandra's voice, mocking, arrogant, triumphant, filled the space. I used your credit to get a $150,000 personal loan. Honestly, Elara, you should thank me. I'm actually activating your credit profile. I remembered the moment with perfect clarity. The crystal glasses, the heavy silverware, the satisfying click of the lock on the trap. Cassandra had been so confident, so secure in her belief that the quiet one would never fight back. The prosecutor continued methodically through the evidence. The forged signatures, the bank records showing transfers, the seized assets. The depth of her betrayal against 9 people, including her own parents. It took the jury less than 4 hours to return. The courtroom filled again for the verdict. On all 18 counts, we find the defendant, Cassandra Vance, guilty. Cassandra's face crumpled for the first time. The reality of the federal system, crashing through her carefully constructed facade. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, the prosecutor stood before the judge. Your Honor, the government requests the court consider several aggravating factors. The defendant exploited family trust, engaged in deliberate concealment of her actions, and has shown zero remorse throughout these proceedings. The judge reviewed the sentencing memorandum, then looked directly at Cassandra. The court sentences you to 11 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will pay full restitution of $560,000 to the victims. Furthermore, you are banned from employment in any financial sector for a period of 15 years following release. The gavel fell, the sound echoing through the silenced courtroom. I watched as federal marshals approached to take Cassandra away. My sister finally looked at me, eyes wide with disbelief, as if she still expected me to intervene, to pull a classified document from my pocket that would save her, the sister she had underestimated for 35 years. As the marshals led Cassandra out, I remained seated, my expression unchanged. The power Cassandra once wielded through charisma and arrogance dissolved in the face of federal law, systematic, impersonal, and final. Not revenge, I thought. Justice. 2 months after Cassandra's sentencing, I was back at my desk, processing the same compliance forms I'd handled for years, but the world around me had profoundly shifted. My office phone rang. It was my mother. Elara, we need your help with those credit bureau forms. Victoria's voice wavered between contrition and embarrassment. Your father tried, but... I'll stop by tonight, I said, my voice neutral. Have the account numbers and the police reports ready. Later, at their empty, opulent Georgetown home. I spread the fraud alert forms across their dining table, the same polished cherry wood where Cassandra had proudly confessed. I worked methodically, explaining each section with detached professionalism. The fraudulent trade lines will be removed in 45 to 60 days. I told them. The credit bureaus have confirmed. The $560,000 is contained. My mother nodded, stealing glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. My father stared at his hands. The emotional damage would linger, but the financial wreckage was being cleaned up by the very system they'd dismissed. My phone buzzed. A text from Deputy Director Hayes. My office, 9 am tomorrow. The following morning, I knocked on Hayes's door precisely at 900. Vance, she said, clipped and direct. She slid a folder toward me. Inside was an official letter with the NARA seal. Your handling of the Vance case was textbook. Ethical. Methodical. The interagency team has nothing but praise for the forensic quality of your file. She tapped the letter. Which is why you've been selected to lead our new Joint National Task Force on Identity Theft Documentation and Evidence Recovery. I scanned the document. Lead investigator. National scope. Inter-agency coordination. The Quiet One processing forms was now the running point on a federal task force. The security implications of these deep, fake frauds are huge. Hayes said. The closest thing to a smile I've ever seen from her. You're uniquely suited. Effective immediately. Thank you, ma'am, I replied, once, a small, contained nod. A week later, I received an envelope from my parents' attorney. Inside were signature pages for their revised trust and estate plan. Cassandra had been formally removed as executor and beneficiary. A no contest clause had been added. I signed where indicated and mailed the documents back without comment. That evening, my father followed me down the driveway as I was leaving. The porch light caught the new lines of worry on his face. Alara. He stood beside my old Volvo 240DL, keys jangling nervously. We thought quiet meant weak. Turns out it meant disciplined. I studied him for a moment. 5 years I'd waited for this validation, for them to finally see me clearly. Now that it had arrived, I found it meant nothing at all. I didn't reply, I didn't need to. I slipped into my car and started the engine. The Volvo, reliable, paid off, true power. I merged into the evening traffic. Flowing through the quiet streets of Alexandria, just another commuter heading home from a safe government job. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't revenge. It's doing your job flawlessly. And the greatest freedom comes not from being seen, but from no longer needing to be.